All right, I'm trying to get started here. It just it keeps telling me that my live video is starting. Here we go. All right, I've been getting a lot of questions from athletes going to St. George about the weather, and I wanted to give some tips and thoughts on how I think people should address what they should be bringing in order to have a great race at St. George. And what I would have thought about doing, but then also address going back a step how you get yourself not so much in this position too. And one of the things that I talk to my athletes about, and one of the things that I think SuperFly Coaching might bring differently to some of these situations. First is it's not about what you necessarily know. So in other words, you can read, you can get certifications, you can find people to help you that have really good book smarts, but you also need to pair that with experiences. And if you look back to, before we talk about St. George, if you look back to Ironman Wisconsin, it was a pretty outlier year. It was very cold, it was very rainy, it was very stormy, yet the pros seemed to do pretty on par with what they normally seem to do. And if you stop and think about why that might be, I'm guaranteeing you it's because they've been in situations in practice and in training and in other races where they've had to deal with those situations, and they've learned through trial and error what's required of them in order to perform well in those situations. So before I give you tips on what it is that I think that you might need to think about in order going into St. George, realize sometimes you have to get off your trainer, which is behind me, and sometimes finish rides that are maybe in cold weather, or if you get stuck in the rain, maybe don't call it a day, or go out and do things that might feel initially uncomfortable. To include training in the off season sometimes too. It might give you an opportunity to train in inclement weather. Because I always tell people we do an outdoor, usually a summer sport, although that's not what we're talking about with St. George, and we're going to have to deal with the elements. And if you do all of your training to avoid the elements, which I don't blame you, I used to hate going out in the rain, not because the rain bothered me, but I hated the cleanup process of making sure my bike was okay, nothing was going to rust, and making sure that it was like camping. Like, the idea of camping sounds awesome until you have to bring all the crap home and then lay it out in the garage and clean it all. But you want to do it enough so that you know what you need to do in order to face a situation like you might be facing in St. George. I trust that most athletes that are going to St. George are of the caliber that they have that experience. However, it's going to be cold, and we don't normally race in the cold. And what do we think about as adjusting for race day? Your nutrition adjustments might be a totally different topic, and that's not really what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm going to focus more on just the logistics of what you're going to wear. But I will say you want to take inventory of what you're going to be eating and drinking. And if you're not sure, if your nutrition is mainly hydration based, so what I mean is if you're pouring most of your stuff into bottles where you're having to consume bottles per hour, even though it might be cold, you might have to go to the bathroom more than you think, but that's better than getting your nutrition wrong and changing a bunch of stuff this week if you haven't been practicing it. I'll just say that right now. So way better to have to take a leak than to have to cramp or bonk because your body's not absorbed to or not used to absorbing the nutrition density if you haven't changed it up in training. So let's just leave that. In terms of what you should be wearing, I'm telling my athletes, we can stress, because some athletes are pretty stressed about it this week. Stop. Let's not use that energy guessing about what it might be like when you get there. Instead, take a few things with you and then test it out on your pre-race rides. And that's what the pre-race brick's for. You should be going out at times where you can be practicing what are the conditions going to be like when I'm out there, and you can somewhat take inventory. If you're on the fence about certain things, there are some things that I have never been out and thought, man, my feet are too hot, or man, my hands are too hot. But if my feet are too cold and my hands are too cold, that can really ruin your day. So if you're on the fence about gloves or foot warmers, I would wear them, because it's not going to ruin your day if you guess those wrong. If you guess those wrong and everything's too hot, that's totally fine. But again, if you don't have dexterity, if you can't shift, if you can't handle your bike on some of the descents, then that's something that's going to really mess your day up. So hands and feet, I would definitely err on the side of warmth. Everything else, I would tend to try to pick things that I either know work or I know I could get rid of in the event that they do become too cumbersome or too hot. In my opinion, really fast racing comes down to monitoring core temperature. If your core temperature is too hot, you're not going to be able to absorb calories and especially calories as efficiently. So cooler weather actually presents your body with the opportunity to not have to worry about monitoring your core temperature so much. And as long as you're okay with it, you actually could probably go faster because your body's going to be able to do more calorie absorption. And you're going to have to kind of factor that into, again, that goes back to nutrition. I'm not going to dive too much into that, but you don't want to wear something that's so warm and expensive that you're going to feel guilty getting rid of if you are super uncomfortable in a full length jacket or something like that, and now you're stuck with it for the rest of the ride. So think about that. So anything tight fitting, maybe compartmentalized. So maybe a vest and arm warmers is better than a full length jacket, because then at least it gives you the flexibility to dump the arm warmers and or the vest and not necessarily have to make a choice totally on both. And the vest might, if you get like something, I used to use Skin Fit. They used to fold up almost to the size of a wallet, and you could kind of even put that in the back pouch and kind of tuck that away if needed. Another little life hack is you can go to Walmart and get some cheap tube socks, cut the toes off, and you can use those as arm warmers. And that way, if you get to an aid station and your arms are too warm, you can roll them down, take them off, and toss them at the aid station, and you're only out $2.99. Well, with inflation now, maybe $3.99. But it's not like you're out $100 for arm warmers. If you only have really good arm warmers and you don't want them anymore, you can roll them down and roll them up almost like donuts on your wrists, and then your arms are exposed. So there's things that you can do in order to just help you decide what you should be racing. And the other thing that I would look at too is, what's the course look like? So you're going to be coming out of the water wet, obviously, but it's also an arid, dry environment. So hopefully you're going to dissipate and get rid of that wetness on your clothes pretty quick. And then I would look at how fast am I hitting the hills, so like I remember doing some races where there was literally snow on the ground, but there was a lot of climbing for the first part of the race. So I knew that even though I would be wet and I would be in a cold environment, I was going to be going primarily uphill. I can remember one particular race in, I think it was called Pacific Crest. It was up Mount Bachelor. So I knew that the first 30 or 40 miles were going to be essentially climbing, and being cold probably wasn't going to be an issue, even though there was standing snow on the side. And then by the time I was at descent, it was going to be, the other thing I was going to say is see what time of the day you're going to be at parts that might present colder. So St. George has a downhill after Snow Canyon, I believe it's called. Then you'll have a long downhill, but if you're going to be hitting it afternoon at the heat of the day, at the height of the day, that'll be a different temperature than trying to descend when it's 40 degrees out. So those are my tips. I would find things that are giving you choices. First, I would test them on the day or 2 days, both going up, see how those feel. If you're on the fence with hands and feet, I would go warm on hands and feet. And if you're not exactly sure what to wear for your torso and your arms, I would do things that aren't necessarily connected to each other. So I would stray away from jackets and go more towards vests and or tight base layers that are maybe short sleeve and thin and non-restrictive. You can even wear those in the swim, and things that allow you to make choices throughout the day. And I would definitely not use things that you're going to be sad if you're without. So if it's a famous heirloom or a valued heirloom that your generations have been passing down, and it's like someone made it out of sheepskin back when they were still farmers, and you can't wait to give it to your kids, I wouldn't take that on your bike as well. And then I would have a couple of choices in your run as well, and to include even a beanie. If you really are that cold, you could grab a beanie for your run. Again, you could get rid of it if you were off on the run. And then I would, if you don't normally wear socks on the bike ride, it might be worth putting the socks on in T1 versus C2, because that might give you an extra layer. So hope this helps. And I just wanted to give some quick tips and some thoughts on things that I was giving to some of my athletes. We're up against 10 minutes, so I wanted to keep this short. But if you have any more questions, you can obviously DM me. And those of you who signed up, we had almost the whole swim clinic signed up from last time I talked about it, if you look at my previous live. But I think we have 2 spots left. So if you're interested in 2 spots, the last 2 spots, let me know. And then we also are going to start a waiting list as well too. So for some people that might have issues. But everyone, hope you have a great race. Travel safe. I'll probably talk to you before that. But that's it for now. Talk to you. Bye.